Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Ally by Fortra podcast, Conversation for Collective Defense. I'm Antonio Sanchez.
And I'm Josh Davies.
And we're going to be your co-hosts on this podcast. And actually, this is our inaugural podcast or pilot. Is it inaugural or pilot? It's a pilot, right? It's one of those. This is our first one.
It's our first one. You probably can tell by the intro already. But what have we got on the agenda today, Antonio?
We got so we're going to be taking a look at the threat landscape, taking over some recent news, recent headlines. Of course, Patch Tuesday. That's always a fun one to talk about with Microsoft. And there's a really great piece of research that just came out recently. The ISC squared, or now they're calling themselves ISC2. State of the workforce study. So we're going to take a look at those, and let's go ahead and get into it. So first off, a little bit of kind of what's happening in the news recently. So ransomware is always a top of mind for everybody. I mean, it's kind of the number one thing that keeps all security leaders awake at night, and they're evolving their techniques yet again. But this last one, I gotta admit, I got a chuckle out of it, not because somebody got ransomed, but because of how they demanded payment. And you're already laughing, so you already know which one I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think you're guilty of having a bit of a morbid sense of humor when it comes to cybersecurity, having worked as an incident responder, kind of, and seeing these happen on a daily basis. But this one really caught my eye. First of all, it seems like quite a fun title, right? The article headlines that I first read was ransomware actors demand $125,000 in baguettes. And what made that quite comical was that this was a French engineering company that had been targeted. But as I kind of read the story, I thought, hey, this maybe isn't just for the lols, as the hackers might say. There might be more of a kind of concerted thought process behind this as to why they would want to demand it in baguettes, rather than just being a bit of a nuisance.
And for our international audience, or maybe for people who don't know, baguettes, we're talking about bread. Okay, yeah. This is food. The ransomware actors are asking to be paid in food, specifically a specific type of bread that's very common in that part of the world. It's in France, right? Or I don't know if that's where but because of the attack happening in France,
so that's a new one for me. In the UK, just to be boil it down to the basics. But yeah, I mean, people might be forgiven for thinking that's a new cryptocurrency that's being demanded. No, it is the food item that they were asking for. Now, that was on the surface level. That was in their ransomware. No, actually, they were asking for Monero, which is a cryptocurrency that's really focused on privacy. So they didn't actually want the bread. If anything, I think it was a bit of a publicity stunt to get people to write these articles about them. Because it certainly grabbed my attention. Ransomware attacks are happening, it seems like almost daily, and we do get a lot covered in the news these days. But there's only so much you can really write about with a ransomware story. Data stolen, drives are encrypted. They demand ransom, and it's interesting if the victims maybe particularly sensitive or has some knock-on effects, but yeah. Maybe they're finding other ways to make their stories newsworthy. And Antonio, why do you think they want to be, so public, not fly under the radar?
I went through my feed, and I have to admit, when I saw that in my feed, and this was my RSS feed, when I saw the word baguettes, I'm like, I've got to see what that is. So it caught my attention. I want to read this article and see what this is all about. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's very much a publicity stunt. For the people that have been around in the security industry for a while, they know that it's its own enterprise. I mean, it's the underground black enterprise that's happening. You have all kinds of actors with various types of skills. And it's sort of a barter and trade system, and people want to partner up and work with other people. And I think that was probably their way of catching people's attention and saying, hey, look at me, I'm important. I'm a player now, and look what I can do to do just that, to make headlines. Because, I mean, it worked for me, because when I was scrolling, doing the first eye scan through all of my feeds, which is usually about 40, 50, when I saw that one, I've got to read that one. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, to your point, it's the morbid the morbid humor of these people. Just, everybody's trying to separate themselves. Basically, they're marketing themselves. They're marketing their skills. And they want to partner up with other like-minded people that'll work together to hopefully, for them, take some kind of lucrative payout. But I mean, I think back several years back when I got into this industry, and I thought about what ransomware was kind of back then. At least when I got in, ransomware was when somebody made it onto a machine, they encrypted it immediately, right? And then they thought, well, before we encrypt, let's go ahead and hide out and see where else we can go, and then we'll encrypt after we've implemented a bunch of backdoors. And then that turned into, well, let me start leaking out some data, and then encrypt, because then I can use that as leverage to say, look, I've got all this sensitive data about you, pay me the money, or I'm going to go ahead and leak all this. And then just a constant evolution. So I guess we're a food now. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the next one, somebody's going to get asked to be paid in beer or whiskey or something like that. I mean,
But yeah, if they're
I
looking, if
don't
they're a
know.
young ransomware group, you're looking to make a name for themselves. I mean, the very fact that we're talking about them, and I'm even hesitant
Right.
to say their name because I feel like that's what they want us to
Yeah.
play into. But it does show, it raises their name, makes people more likely to pay potentially because they realize, oh, you guys do mean business. I've read about you before, and also there's that element of kind of honor amongst thieves, right? If you pay the ransom,
Right.
you more stats show that I saw reading on InfoSec magazine that 75% of organizations get attacked again, and I saw some other
Right.
stats that showed that a high percentage of those get attacked by the same organization. So I think that's part of it, trying to, hey, you can trust us, you pay us. We're the good friendly guys, are kind of maybe a little bit more like the hacktivism or the kind of lol hackers that used to exist back in the 90s, the good old days maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because at one of the most recent events I was at, that, again, talking about it's an underground enterprise, the ransomware group actually even offered, hey, if you need help with unencrypting your systems, we've got tech support standing by that once you
Mm,
get the encryption, after you've paid us, we'll give you the encryption key. And if you have problems with recovery, then we've got a great tech support system that'll help you recover your
yeah.
machine. So the thief or the criminal is actually now wanting to be helping in recover, in helping their victim recover. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's a morbid
Yeah. It's
morbid sense of humor.
it's testament just you finally on how sophisticated these ransomware actors have become, and that is a consequence of people paying the ransom and then be able to reinvest those funds into their organization. You saw the Conti chat logs that were leaked, that they had effective HR
Right.
departments and operating like a fully functioning business. The Lockbit ransomware, probably one of the most famous, because they put a lot of effort into marketing. They released kind of comparisons of us versus the other top ransomware families. Look how quick we can encrypt things. So they're really battling for like the sophisticated buyers to buy their ransomware as a service. So potentially that's another play for this group, that they want to build up a name for themselves, and they can start selling their ransomware payloads and malware for that kind of lateral movement and ultimate detonation of the encryption payload, to be able to demand as much money as possible. But
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, we could go on and talk about that for hours, but I'm going to go ahead and move us along here. So, there is going to be a new administration here in the United States come January. As with any election, any new administration, there's always going to be some concern as far as, what will the next administration bring as far as their policies are concerned, and particularly how is it going to affect the cyber world and organizations, and kind of the how organizations work together with both public sector and private sector to be able to battle the ransomware actors. So, uh, Josh, I'll let you kind of take the first shot at this. I know you're not as close to it because you're
yeah.
overseas, but any kind of initial thoughts, from kind of what we think we might expect, or kind of some of the concerns that might be that might be happening, or that
Yeah,
might
sure.
happen.
Sure, and I know a little bit from the outside in, but you can definitely correct me if any of my assessments have been incorrect from my position. But we've undergone a kind of, in the UK where I'm based, a change of administration. I think over the summer. It feels a lot longer than that though. And so it's common. Whatever new government is installed, they come in with They want to make a mark, and so they tear up certain things that they think maybe were wasteful or could be done better, and also they start to signal where they're likely to kind of operate in. So from my position of looking at Donald Trump, so the new administration, it's less regulation, which seems to be more encouraging kind of free market principles of innovation will get us there, and we don't need to kind of add red tape to make it more difficult, which I totally get the free market kind of angle. US and the Western world is kind of run really well by innovation in places like AI and cybersecurity, kind of driving us forward in cloud hosted cloud providers. But I think cybersecurity is maybe not an area you want to kind of skimp on with the red tape, because I heard it described recently as it's the good brakes you put on a fast car so the car doesn't smash into something and it can be allowed to go fast. That's your business. Cybersecurity is the brakes.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're kind of
Right.
skimping on the brakes, yeah, you'll be pretty fast for a while, but you're probably going to hit that brick wall at some point or the other. So yeah, hopefully that's maybe that the messages is more regulation in other areas and not in cybersecurity. But I think that's certainly what a lot of us are holding our breath on, because there has been talk of removing certain bills, I believe, around AI safety that have already been kind of tried to be passed through by the last administration, or executive orders. Forgive me if I get the difference between those two.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and you're right. I mean, a lot of this stuff, and it happens with every single election cycle. Whenever there's a different administration coming in versus the one that continues their their service, is what's this going to mean? I think everybody can agree that we're all for helping to remove some bureaucracy, helping to remove some red tape, especially in the cyber world where information sharing and threat sharing is a good thing. I mean, because we're at the end of the day, we're all fighting the same fight against the criminal actors. So yeah, I mean it's like it's a great analogy of the brakes on a car. You want to make sure that the brakes, there's going to be things especially when you're reorganizing, where some things are going to fall through the cracks, and you're not going to feel them or understand kind of what happened until it actually starts affecting somebody in a negative way or some group in a negative way. But at the end of the day, I mean, people definitely need to keep their eye on kind of what's happening in cyberspace, in the cyber world, and ensure that one isn't one of those things that gets dropped through the cracks in the efforts to kind of remove some of the red tape, some of the bureaucracy to improve.
Mm-hmm.
To hopefully improve things, but we'll wait and see. Like anything else, I mean, we'll wait and see.
Yeah, well, because I know you do a lot of work on talking about how cybersecurity enables business operations. So we floated that as to why you need the brakes. But could you maybe quickly give us a rundown of why it affects the bottom line, basically, why it's a business enabler and not an obstacle to business?
A few years back, it's easy to get in our own blinders when we're looking at, you got to be secure, you got to be secure, you got to be secure with everything that you do, or it's going to put the enterprise at risk. But a few years back, I actually got an opportunity to work with the former executive director of security at a very large financial institution. And he said something that is kind of stuck with me ever since. And that is, there's not a single organization in the entire world whose goal is it to be the most secure organization. Nobody's goal is that. But every single organization has a goal to either increase revenue, increase demand, or increase productivity. And there's others. Everybody wants to reduce costs. Everybody wants to do other things. But those kind of core three things is something that every single organization, regardless of whether you're a global 100 or the mom and pop small business, everybody wants to increase the amount of money that they're bringing in. And this also includes the charitable organizations, because they're looking for donations. So increase revenue, increase demand, demand for those services, demand for those products. Again, whether it's an organization that's selling something or an organization that's, a charitable organization. And, they want to, they want to improve efficiency with everything that they do. And so as a security professional, his goal was, how does security support those growth initiatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of always been something that stuck with me. So that's why ever since I heard him speak, I thought to myself, wow, that's exactly the way we should think about it. Because so oftentimes security leaders are disconnected from the business because they spend too much time talking about the bits and the logs and the SIMs and all of those things, when at the end of the day, they need to be able to communicate the business value. How does this affect the business? How does this support the business? How can security support this digital transformation initiative of moving everything to the cloud, or being cloud first, or being multi-cloud, or whatever that business initiative is? Because those are the business initiatives that are going to increase revenue, right, and increase demand for the product. So ever since then, I always took a different stance, or a different view of security, and that is, how do we help the business grow? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it just keeps the business going, keeps your data protected, whether that's your secret source or whether that's your private data. and keeps you online, which I think is, most businesses done online these days. So I think we're getting better at understanding that. But my concern as a practitioner and having worked in security operations centers where we've done certain compliance led responsibilities, you can do them to a certain point where you've ticked the compliance box, and the spirit of them really is to kind of take them that little bit further and integrate them effectively into a security strategy, rather than have them kind of done in isolation so you can tick a box on a report. So my concern is I already think that compliance standards they're getting better, but they're generally too slow and too thin as it is regulation. So if people do the bare minimum, I see it as something I have to do in order to be able to deal with X company or play in this
Right.
this commercial arena that I'm in, rather than saying it's a great way to kind of build my security and focusing on the security instead of compliance. So if those compliance focused decision makers, if the compliance regulation gets lesser, I already think that they're kind of the ones that are struggling and kind of having the most cybersecurity issues out there in that arena, rather than the ones who take it a little bit more seriously. But hey, if you're not being rewarded for that, and if you're spending all your budget on the cybersecurity strategy when everyone else is focusing on developing their product, you can see how the free market leaves you behind, which is why I don't think it's a good way to kind of regulate cybersecurity for businesses.
Right. Yeah. And just talking a little bit about, regulation legislation, it always seems like cybersecurity in general is one of those things where it goes too fast, or it moves too fast in order to be able to have the legislation even just try to kind of keep up. And recently, I don't know if they've been if you've been keeping up with this much in overseas in the UK, but at least recently here in the United States, it was a pretty big deal out here because there was an AI bill that got rejected by the governor of California. The bill is called SB Sam Bravo 1047. If anybody wants to Google and look that up, but essentially what the rejection was, AI, large language models, or large models, they were trying to pass legislation on how to be able to regulate those and hold people accountable, which on the surface seems like a great idea. But the flaw with the bill, and the reason why it was rejected, there's a few reasons, is number one, it only applied to the developers of the models. It only applied to the developers, and then it only applied to the extremely large models with significant computational resource requirements. And even in the bill, it said $100 million in development costs. So it was pretty restrictive, because on the other hand, what about other models that come out that only cost 99 million or less than 99 million to develop, but yet still could produce the same outcomes? And the other thing is that, but you can't actually require the developers. There's no way a developer is ever going to know what their model is going to be used to, because models for the most part are pretty generic. It's like having somebody say, hey, let's take a petroleum company. Petroleum company makes gasoline or petrol, depending on what part of the world you're in. Now, you can use that petrol, gasoline, to either power your car to get you to work. You could use it at a construction site to power a generator so people can work, or it can be used for, by an arsonist and setting fire to a house. So are you going to hold the petroleum company accountable if somebody decides to set a house on fire? Well, no. Well, that's kind of the same thing, because it didn't actually call out the end users, and there has to be some end user accountability. So that was the main reason those are the main reasons for the rejections. Initially there was a little bit of what is, kind of the, hey, why is this rejected? Nobody wants to do that. Or there was a lot of kind of, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Gut reaction was, this is going to go AI rampant. Well, there's a whole bunch of AI laws that have already been signed into legislation by actually several states. It's kind of all over the place, but this was one that they really wanted to kind of be methodical and be careful of making sure we kind of get this one right. And at the end of the day, it's forcing the conversation to happen with other leaders to ensuring that, hey, this was a good effort, but we need to go ahead and take two with that. So, so right now, yeah, go ahead.
Tying into the global stuff, because that you talk about the effort to regulate AI. I know the US, UK, and Australia, and I think a few others kind of came together to create the secure guidelines for deploying and developing AI. Nothing crazy new in there that we hadn't already seen that isn't standard DevSecOps type of practices. But yeah, the where AI goes, maybe that's one that's more vocal. Everyone wants to talk about AI, so maybe that's the kind of cues we should take for where I might be looking at how they
Right.
approach cybersecurity. I did notice that on the new administration had on their ticket to repeal executive order on AI and also some of the kind of Chips and Science Act pieces. Instead, offering rather than the funding given for like semiconductors to create, being more reliant on homegrown chips for our compute power and having more control of that supply chain attack surface, which maybe we could talk about another time. But
Mm-hmm.
that's certainly been an issue in the past with chips having smaller chips on them that could be used for backdoor access. But the new administration seems to think they want to tackle this through rather than giving donations to US customers, having tariffs on external companies sending in chips, which kind of brings me on to the threat of these trade wars. And it's kind of a
Right.
talk that's seeming quite loud from this administration, and was last time as well. And I think actually the sentiment is it doesn't play out to everybody. Often it's a negotiating tactic, but there's one area that we did see it play out, and I expect to see it again, and that is directed towards China. And they have a very sophisticated, cybersecurity program, as well as numerous state-sponsored actors that have been well documented. Is there could we expect any change to the threat landscape with kind of US or China tensions going forward, Antonio, or is that too early to speculate?
It's too early. It's like anything else. There's a lot of noise out there. There's always a lot of noise with every new administration that's going to be coming in. So it's one of those we'll kind of wait and see. Kind of all we're all kind of speculating at this point, but it is important to kind of be mindful and have these conversations now because for some it requires a lot of planning to figure out what are we going to do moving forward. I mean, there's contracts that have been signed. Those contracts are going to likely need to be honored, and they're going to be broken. I mean, there's other penalties involved with that. So it's all speculative, but nonetheless, I mean, it's one of those things where it's good that conversations are happening, and like
Yeah.
anything else, we'll wait and see what will actually come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hey,
Absolutely.
I don't know if you saw this, changing gears a little bit, but there was somebody who actually got caught. They were trying to extort a healthcare organization. It was here in the United States. It's up in the northern part, northwestern part of the United States. They got 10 years in prison for trying to extort a U.S. healthcare provider. Great that you found somebody, or you were able to hold somebody accountable. But B, it makes me wonder. Well, for every one that we get, how many others are out there that go unpunished because people can't get to them because they're overseas somewhere
Yeah.
we just can't get to them, and the resource requirement to be able to get that one would be great, but then there's a whole bunch of a whole bunch of others that are out there that we can't get to. So, but I mean, it's great to see a win on the board once in a while, right?
Yeah. It's a good question though, because is it for the warm and fuzzy feeling of we are doing something, some highly visible
Right,
arrests, or are we kind of killing the Hydra, or are we just chopping off one of its heads and then a few more kind of pop up later down the line?
right,
If I put my cyber lawyer hat on, and to be perfectly clear, I'm not a cyber lawyer, but I actually found cybersecurity when I was studying law years and years ago as a really exciting area because attribution is so difficult and it is such a gray area. And so this, when I see stuff like this, I have two hats on. One is like, great, it's great to see them kind of catching stuff. Hopefully, this serves as some sort of deterrent to people who maybe more of the script kiddie level who are getting into it, who aren't as confident at covering up their tracks. But also,
right.
I've said some interesting stories about how people, they actively frame other people as the kind of the
I
source of
was
the
thinking
criminal
that also.
activity. Yeah. So the Dr. Ransomware one is a story that always comes to mind. Who was a doctor in South America who used to have some involvement in I think it was a coding club in the university he went to. He was the founder of it. He doesn't fit the profile of a criminal at all. He does stuff for surgery on young kids and is, or for intents and purposes, an upstanding member of the community. But it was his email that was being used for all these extortion peats. The connections were coming through his machine. So like they speculate it could be a proxy, or it could actually have been this guy. And that I always think is a great tale of caution when it comes to, are we really getting the bad guy here? Are we really kind of stopping it at the source? Or is this kind of us just desperately trying and hoping that we might get closer? So I mean, it's not futile. It's worth at least trying. But
Right.
hopefully that puts a deterrent on the people attacking hospitals at least, because we have seen healthcare being targeted so much more. It feels like in the last few years because of the how urgent it is for them to get back up and running. They're more likely to pay the ransom, but obviously that has a direct impact on human life. So morally,
Right.
I think that maybe maybe we go harder, or the agencies that be go harder after these types of threat actors that have more of an emotive sponsor or target critical infrastructure. And Tony, a question for you then. So, we have seen probably a breakdown in the global kind of prosecution of these types of threat actors. And I noticed this is a US actor on US soil, right? Is that kind of where we're at now? Have we lost a lot of that capability to kind of take on threat actors globally? Because they are global threats, as you kind of alluded to earlier in that ransomware challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, you were talking about how, what was this, somebody who may have been framed. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been following a little bit more closely over the past probably year or so is starting to try and take some of that fight back to the threat actors and to their infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And, some of these agencies, I mean, we talk about collaborative, collaborating together, organizations collaborating together with maybe in ways they didn't think about collaborating in the past. But it takes an effort like that to be able to hopefully put a dent in some of those, and working with multiple law enforcement agencies, having working with Microsoft, for instance, because of their reach. They have a digital crimes unit, and working with them, and basically going out there into the ether and bringing down, doing their, everybody's doing their part, of the vendors like us doing our part, and everybody's part, to go out there and actually bringing down infrastructure and affecting their infrastructure so that they can't continue using their infrastructure, trying to interrupt their operations and making it, increasing the cost for them. Because at the end of the day, the warm and fuzzies are great. You got somebody, they're going to be held accountable. Awesome. But, you had you cut the head off a hydra, you got 5 heads that grew back, or this is just a mule, in a much larger organizations. You have to kind of go in deeper and disrupt, the operations, the backbone of the operations whenever possible to disrupt that, or to have any significant effect of disruption. And it's one of those things that's not going away anytime soon. But again, continuing to work together, continuing to collaborate, continuing to cross international borders, continuing to, the co-opetition model, where maybe your competitor is somebody who becomes your ally, to be able to help fight the adversaries, right?
Yeah.
Going back to that gentleman I spoke to, that security leader years back, he told me, this was, wow, more than 5 years ago. I want to say about 7, 8 years ago. He told me that he had a standing meeting with his peer at every single one of his competitors. So all of the other financial institutions, he had a standing meeting once a month to speak with to speak with all of them and discuss kind of best practices, what they're seeing in the industry, what the latest tactics the adversaries are using,
Mm-hmm.
they're using against them. And in my head, I was blown away. I thought, wait a minute, like, their respective companies are all competing for the same business out in the market, but each one of them don't see themselves as competitors to each other. They all see themselves as partners in fighting the same bad guys that are attacking their institutions. Like, wow, what a concept. You're partnering with somebody from a competitive organization, but because of your role and your function, you don't see them as a competitor. You see them as as an ally, as somebody that can help you with your fight, against the same type of adversary.
Yeah.
And then fast forward a few years, and at a recent conference, that was actually the theme, is, better together, stronger together. I'm messing up the phrase, but
I
it's like,
like
wow,
that.
he was
Yeah.
doing this 5, 7 years ago, before that was even a thing to do. So having some maybe uncomfortable partnerships, what seems like uncomfortable partnerships, and cooperating with these organizations that maybe you wouldn't thought of, of working with in the past, because to the market, those two are competitors. So
Mm-hmm. It's an
yeah,
interesting concept. I like that ally approach, and it made me think. I wonder who they see as their enemy. Maybe it's the board, someone on the board of the budget holders. There's their collective enemy, security leaders. But absolutely, yeah. We at Fortune, right? We worked with some of the law enforcement agencies sharing that threat intelligence, and every security company is great at putting out there the things that they're latest to find and discover, because we need to feed off each other's intelligence and the insights, or that each organization has, whether that's a small organization or a massive security provider that serves loads of organizations. Whoever catches something first, disclosing that responsibly is super effective at making
right.
sure we can catch the latest and greatest threats, and before they get too big. Um, So yeah, is it nice to see some level of attribution? I'm still a little bit skeptical about it, and I think that I would put more of my faith in that collective defense angle that you brought up and turned us to at the end than I do at the moment in the kind of capabilities of law enforcement agencies to kind of kill all the hydras and knock off all their heads so they don't come back. This is a problem that's not going away, right? I think that's something we're going to talk about
Right.
when we get into the workforce analysis piece at the end of this.
Right. No, absolutely. All right, moving right along. Patch Tuesday. So Patch Tuesday just came out recently, and there was a lot of vulnerabilities, as there are with every Patch Tuesday, but there was a couple specifically that were under active exploit. You want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, sure. So this one was Patch Tuesday obviously comes around all the time. This one felt a little bit more exciting, I guess, because they were some of them being actively exploited. Microsoft even called that out. We've had one as well that was picked up by the Google threat team, which is disclosed by them, and so likely to be some sort of nation state level user of that
Hmm.
exploit, because they must have seen it exploited in the wild. And yeah, big. I think 60% or more of them this month were, or this Tuesday, were remote code execution, which is my absolute
Hmm.
favorite type of exploit, because
Right.
that can let you do pretty much whatever you want to. And some of them were even
Pretty much.
unauthenticated remote code execution, which means you don't need to have that
That's scary.
prerequisite of compromised credentials. So yeah, call out those ones. I can list out the CVEs, but that might be easier to kind of check out our blog and take those from there, then note them down on your pen and paper for this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So everybody actually check out our blog. We'll have a blog about that. Um, I think we'll have a video about that as well from one of the folks from our research team. So yeah, definitely check that one out. But always interesting. Yeah, the RC, especially the unauthenticated RC, that one's just, oh man, that one's very, very concerning whenever you see something like that. Because yeah, but it
Yeah.
happens. What do you do? It happens. It's software, and it happens to everybody. I mean, we pick on Microsoft. I mean, there's a reason they call it Patch Tuesday, is because you know that it's going to happen for Microsoft. You're going to have a few dozen in there, and what do you do? But we keep moving on and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, vulnerabilities are a consequence of this rapid innovation and development that we do on the technology side, which we need to do to keep moving
Yep.
forward. And even technology that hasn't been updated in years and years and years, you still can find new vulnerabilities in there if the
Yep.
researcher gets lucky or has a brilliant idea. And when I say researcher, I also mean the guys on the other side as well. So yeah, there's business as usual. These patches are roll out standard. Just a few interesting ones to call out, but that one authenticated one, I want to simmer down some of the people are rushing to kind of go and patch that one now, because it is a Kerberos based exploit. But Microsoft are claiming right now that it's not that easy to exploit. So those got a 9.8 out of 10. There seems to be a few kind of prerequisites or limitations to the scenario in which you could actually realize that vulnerability and exploit it. So yeah, check your patches. Obviously, you've got to be responsible at the testing and deployment in order to make sure that it doesn't cause you further headaches, because we don't. Security shouldn't be the obstacle to business operations. We're meant to enable it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Moving right along. AWS it's reInvent is coming up. Are you going to go to reInvent this year?
Sadly, not. The no one paying for my flight this year. Maybe business classes is getting more and more expensive. No, I'm joking, but I wasn't asked to attend. Having you and I have met there before when we were doing a few speaking pieces. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
they've got somebody else on that. Are you going?
Actually, I am going. It'll be my first time to reInvent. I've been to Reinforce, AWS Reinforce, but never been to reInvent. Reinforce is the security specific AWS security specific conference. So this is the larger of their two conferences. I'm told by some of the people that I'm going to be attending with that have gone to it before that it's an enormous big conference that's going to span multiple resorts, which is in the Las Vegas Strip. So
Mm.
already got my walking shoes. I got a couple pairs of walking shoes, knowing I'll be doing a lot of walking here and there. But they tell me it's pretty big and pretty spread out. So I don't know exactly what to expect, other than I'm going to take some comfortable walking shoes and probably going to change them, from time to time, and I'll have my pedometer on and seeing how far I
Yeah.
actually walk. I think the most I've ever walked at an event was 13,000 steps. and that was just staying inside of one specific resort, never leaving the resort, which is
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. And now we're talking about multiple resorts,
Well,
but they say
Antonio,
they're going to have buses out there, so we'll see what
yeah.
happens.
Well, I don't think you're the first person who's going on a trip to Las Vegas who doesn't know what to expect and is preparing for anything. But yeah, looking for that one. The security conference is great. I know AWS. There's some exciting announcements on the horizon, which I can't say anything
Mhm.
about right now. But hope maybe we can debrief after
Oh,
the event. I'm spending next week or this week actually with them doing some training on some of the latest and greatest security solutions and tools that they brought out in the AWS offices. And also here, look out for there might be some accolades flying around as well, maybe some special mentions. So yeah,
nice.
teasers.
Good deal. Teasers. Yeah, we'll definitely have to come back. Talk about this one again on the next session, and I'll tell you kind of how that one went. But yeah, more to come. But I'm excited. I mean, it's in Las Vegas. I've been to Las Vegas a whole bunch of times for a number of other conferences, but each conference is a little different. Each trip is a little bit different. So, we'll see how
Yeah,
this
looking
one's
forward.
gonna
Send me
turn
some
out.
photos.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. All right, cool. All right, let's see here. Moving right along. So we have a new ISC squared, or now I think they're calling themselves ISC2, just released their latest cybersecurity workforce study. This came out towards the end of October. They've been doing this one now for a few years now. So the number that's been floating around in the cyber world typically is between about 3.5 and 4.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs year on year. So I'm always interested to see kind of what are, kind of the high level things in this particular report, but also interested in seeing how some things change. One of the things that I noticed is that the actual cybersecurity workforce estimate remained flat year over year at just under 5.5 million cybersecurity professionals kind of that are
And
working or
I think that's
in the role.
the first time it
Yeah, that
stagnated,
is the
right?
first time. Yes, yes. The first time it's been stagnant. Yeah. Although the gap looks like it widened a little bit, the actual gap from one year to the next widened because it used to hover between 3.5 and 4.5 million, or that's usually the number that's quoted. Now it's almost 4.8 million, which is actually an increase of 19% year over year. Wow, that's a lot of
So,
unfilled roles.
so more positions are being created, but less people. Well, the amount of people working in cybersecurity has stayed the same. Well,
Right.
we're used to seeing both of those grow at the same time, right? Because it's no secret that there's a
Yeah.
cybersecurity skills gap, and there's a lot of programs now these days to get people to do career transitions, particularly from the military or kind of relevant fields. So, yeah, is there any insight into why they thought that maybe this year had been a deviation from the previous trends of continuous growth on both?
There's been some of the forums that I follow have some people that are leaving this particular field, this particular industry for various reasons. So that might be a contributor. I don't know how big of a contributor that's going to be, but I think one of the interesting things though is you talked about the programs and upskilling folks. When they break out the different major regions, so North America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, Latin America was the only one where the number actually shrank, meaning that they have more roles or they're filling roles
Mm.
faster in Latin America. And part of that, what I remember a few years back when I attended a conference that was out in Colombia, that I couldn't help but notice how young the audience was, and almost all of them were cybersecurity leaders or just about to be security leaders. And what I found out at that conference was they actually started creating specific programs to be able to fast track from university into these roles, or concentration of cybersecurity related kind of roles, such that they're much better prepared to be able to take on these roles immediately and earlier in their careers. So what it looks like to me is, now that they have a few years, and then this was over 5 years ago, so now they have a few years under their belt of some of these programs, and it's not just, it's Colombia, it was Costa Rica,
Mm.
it was Argentina, it was a number of different countries that have implemented some of these concentration programs, cybersecurity concentration programs, to be able to up level the skills. And now they're specifically starting to see the fruition of that because they don't have as big of a workforce gap. And about last year, we started seeing some of these similar type of programs that were happening. There were some in the UK, there were some that were happening in Australia as well. I think I read a report that in Italy and Germany, they saw some of the success there and started to create those similar programs to be able to upskill. I mean, are you seeing anything? I mean, I know you have a bunch of circles or your circle of people that you follow in the forums that you follow as well. Kind of, are you hearing anything?
Yeah, definitely seeing some more murmurs of those kind of apprenticeships types of certain
Mm-hmm.
programs. I'm not sure how many of them actually exist right now because part of what I do actually outside of my kind of 9 to 5 work is I do some cybersecurity mentorship programs to help people get into those entry level roles because I think I alluded to it earlier. I kind of started down a path into law, and so I'm a product of the skills gap. You know, I don't think they would have taken a chance on me if they had enough qualified comp sci majors kind of queuing up to get a job.
By the
But
way,
yeah,
you're the only person I've ever known that started in law and ended up in cyber. I just want you to know that.
yeah, no, I've had a few tangents. I also did studied classics and ancient history, so I'm not sure how that one applies. Law, I managed to make that one. The problem solving and methodical approach was actually very similar. Applying case law is very similar to applying computer law. How does it function? How's it intended to function? And then how has somebody tried to manipulate it or bend or break it to perform an action that they wanted that wasn't intended for, or wasn't kind of scoped out. So there was a lot of parallels, that very methodical problem solving piece. But going back to people trying to get in now, so I'm talking to lots of the kind of people trying to make that career switch, entry level people. It's been a tough year. They've described to
Hmm.
me kind of applying for jobs as psychological warfare because they're still seeing the positions come up, and so they're sending out lots of applications, and there seem to be not that many people actually getting back to them or hiring. So sometimes these positions seem to be put out there while a freeze is still in place. And that is, I think, reflected in this report. There's a lot of kind of hiring freezes or budget
Hmm.
constraints. But also, one of the really key findings they had about interesting approaches was they expect AI to have some sort of impact into morphing the role of a cybersecurity professional or analyst.
Right.
So they're now trying to hire, rather than looking for specific skills, looking for kind of more generic problem solving skills or softer skills, someone who can kind of pivot rather than do a very guardrail task. But I think that's been true of good security operations centers since forever, right? You don't know what the cybersecurity program tomorrow is going to really look like, so you don't want to hire kind of copy and paste suits type people. You want free thinkers who are going to be at the forefront, the cutting edge of the cybersecurity trends, developing new solutions. When I was starting out in the SOC, it was not AI that was going to take our jobs; it was automation. And hey, you're
Right.
going to be needed if we can write a script that this happens, then we'll take that action, contain it, so on, so on. Well, we wrote the automation, and we wrote it for things that were really annoying for us to have to do. So I think that's kind of what I saw that approach was. Hey, how can we hire people who know enough about cybersecurity to then make the application of these kind of AI LLMs, which I'm still skeptical about how much they can actually do, having worked with machine
Right.
learning algorithms in the detection space for quite some time. But that's an interesting kind of pivot, and I hope that also will. They're looking for people who are more focused on the soft skills and understand that hey, it's an evolving arena. You can learn on the job. Google is your friend. You don't have to know everything. You're not a lawyer. Just use my law background. You're not turning up with 100 years of case law and dusty old textbooks. This is an ever evolving field. You have to kind of really be on the forefront
Right.
of it, or get left behind. But any other key findings that you kind of thought stuck out from you? I know you keep an eye on the trends as well,
Yeah.
which I always think is a very keen approach from yourself that I get too
Yeah.
drawn in the numbers of today.
The AI thing that you mentioned, I mean, it's interesting because it was a breakdown on hiring managers versus non-hiring managers. The non-hiring managers actually had higher emphasis or on the AI/ML than the hiring folks, which was a little odd to me. But maybe it's that thought process of thinking that AI is going to be able to increase that efficiency and replace that person. So that one I thought was interesting. Of course, cloud computing security. You've got to be able to know the cloud or have a concept of the cloud. I mean, I remember early in my career, I remember seeing people, associates of mine that says, "Hey, if you have experience in using, one of the big three at the time, antivirus slash,
Mm-hmm.
APP vendors, like, you have experience with that. That's what you put. You had people that put their experience on their CVs or the resumes on, these are the technologies that I know. And he's like, I'm very good at endpoint security. I'm very good at mail security. I'm very good at, whatever it is. And over the years, you've got to be more generalist. So when they see these, because I hear it too. I also mentor, minorities and college kids that want to get into the field as well. And they're like, yeah, but they require 10 years of experience of this and 10 years experience of that and 5 years experience of this and 6 years experience of that. And some of those, like, they require 10 years experience of this, but this concept's only been around for 4 years, because you could tell that people aren't paying as much of attention to what they're actually putting on the job recs. And so the trend is becoming more and more. There's plenty of, they're unicorns. Everybody wants the unicorn, but there's plenty of labor force that's out there that's willing to get into the field if you're willing to kind of open your mind and say, I'm looking for the problem solving skills. I'm looking for the critical thinking skills. I'm looking for the people that can articulate something, to different types of audiences, be it a technical audience or a business audience. I'm looking for people that work well with other people. I'm looking for people that I don't have to babysit, that they're self-starters, because we live in a remote, working world now. So it's very much more the soft skills and people opening up their mindset. And we're starting to see that now more and more of saying, I can teach the tech, but I can't teach somebody to be self-motivated. I can't teach somebody to work well with others. I can't teach somebody, to some of these other things. I'm hoping they have all of these things and they just have a curiosity that's going to be able to carry into the rest of the way, which then, as a leader, I'm crying right here because allergies. I'm dying with allergies today. My allergy medication hasn't kicked in. So I've wiped my face a few times during this one, but it's all right. But yeah, have the soft skills. And if you're willing to learn the tech, and that's kind of how I got into this, is I knew tech, but I didn't know security tech. But not realizing once I got into security, like, a lot of the concepts, are actually fairly similar. Now I'm just learning some new concepts. But yeah, I mean, opening up opening up what you consider to be, qualifications for a candidate, and then, doing that, because there's a lot of folks that are out there that want to get into this field, but for whatever reason they keep, being told that, well, we're looking for a unicorn. Yeah. And, that's just not going to happen. But anyway, it's a really great report. If you haven't read it, by all means, highly recommend you go to ISC Square's, ISC2, their site, the workforce study, and they've got actually the older ones that are out there as well if you want to take a look at how things have changed over the last few years. I always like looking back on 2-3 years, 2 or 3 versions back to see how things have changed, especially if the execs, if they have some of the same metrics that they've had before. But yeah, anyway, good stuff there. All right. And I mean, we're coming up on time. I think we need to call it.
Keep going, but I was like, we.
We could keep talking.
As I said to you, the hardest thing is stopping when you're trying to hit key points quickly.
Right, absolutely. We could have just talked about ransomware this whole time and still run out of time.
I know. I was going to talk about how Lockbit said sorry when they compromised the children's hospital, and they restored it for free. Like the good side of the. There's endless good stuff.
Honor amongst thieves.
Yeah.
The honor amongst thieves. All right, good deal. Well, hey everybody, we appreciate you hanging on and being with us on our pilot episode or our first episode. So I guess we're going to go ahead and call it. We're going to go ahead and sign off now. Hope everybody, hope you enjoyed today's session. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And with that, for Josh, I'm Antonio, and we're going to go ahead and sign off.
Cheers, Antonio. Stay safe out there, everyone. That's way too cheesy. We need something like that.
Yeah, we definitely need, we need something there.
Yeah.